Let's get a sense now of both where we are and when we are. If we look to the north, we have the famous Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. We see before us the gray dome, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Behind it is the Dome of the Rock.
Yes.
When we talk about the Dome of the Rock that's being referred to, according to Jewish tradition, that is the foundation stone. That is the place where all of creation emanated. Literally, it is the center of the world.
Wow.
That is the place where, according to the Bible, Abraham binds Isaac. That's the place where David's son Solomon will build the Holy Temple. It's destroyed after about 450 years by the Babylonians, and then is rebuilt by Ezra and Nehemiah, refurbished or renovated by Herod, and later destroyed by the Romans in the year 70.
Wow.
That all happens over there on Mount Moriah. Now we have the walls just outside, the old city walls.
Yes.
Now, many people believe that the old city walls are in fact thousands of years old because Jerusalem is thousands of years old. But the old city, while it's old, it's not that old. The walls are only...
It's not the ancient city.
Exactly, it's not the ancient city.
I've learned that.
There you go. These walls are only 450 years old. Now, where we're standing is almost 4,000 years old. So we don't get that excited about 450 years. They were built by Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire. Now, what's interesting is that when he builds the walls around Jerusalem, he leaves out the ancient biblical city of Jerusalem, the city of David, where we are right now. He leaves it out.
Mount Zion.
Mount Zion. He leaves it out. So now, if we look to the east, we have the famous Mount Olives, right? That today you have on the Mount of Olives over 150,000 Jews who are buried there. Going back 2,600 years up until today. It's the longest active Jewish cemetery in the world. In the Bible, when David is fleeing from his son Absalom, he goes down from the city of David into the Kidron Valley, climbs up the slopes of the Mount of Olives. He turns back to Jerusalem, back to Mount Moriah, and he bows down crying. He's running away from the city that he built, from the son that he loves. He's running away. He doesn't know if he'll ever come back. He turns and he says goodbye.
Wow. And that was on Mount of Olives.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Who can be buried on the Mount of Olives today? Like
people.
Anyone?
I mean, people can be buried. It's a Jewish cemetery, but people who want to be buried there, there are many, many notable people throughout history. So there are a lot of people who they want to be buried in such a significant place. And I'll tell you another reason. People wonder, why do so many people want to be buried there? Over 150,000 people.
Yeah.
In the end of days, according to Jewish tradition, there's going to be what's called Tchiyat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead.
That's right.
And the people buried on the Mount of Olives come back first. So if you were...
I want to be buried
Right,
there.
so if you're an early adopter type, that you already have the newest iPhone or whatever, then you're the type of person who wants to be buried on the Mount of Olives.
Jews?
Well, you don't want to be buried there right now.
Not right now.
Tell us a little bit more. This is so fascinating.
So now if we go to the south,
Yes.
we have the ridge of Armon HaNatziv. And one of the most difficult to understand chapters in the Bible takes place there. We're talking about the book of Genesis, chapter 25. God speaks to Abraham. Says, Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son, the son that you love, Isaac, and I want you to bring him to the land of Moriah. Behind us is Mount Moriah. He's living in Beersheba in the south. He goes on a 3-day journey. And it says on the 3rd day of that journey, he is able to see the place from afar. Now, topographically speaking, the first place that Abraham and Isaac would have been able to see Mount Moriah was from this ridge over here. So imagine for a minute, Abraham and Isaac, 3,800 years ago, are standing on that ridge, and the Bible says that Isaac turns to his father and says, Dad, where's the sheep?
When are we going to sacrifice?
Right, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham says, don't worry, God will provide, exactly. And at that point, probably Isaac begins to...
He didn't know it was going to be him.
Exactly.
At the moment,
They come down the slopes here, walk through the Kidron Valley, up the slopes of Mount Moriah.
This is actually...
This is the place.
We're in the path where Abraham was walking on his way to, with his promise in his hand, to sacrifice.
Exactly. Now, I don't want you guys to be nervous or your viewers at home to be nervous, so spoiler alert.
Well, I'm carrying Laura Lynn that way just in case you guys want to know, so I'm the bigger one.
Probably you'll win,
So this is a little spoiler alert. Abraham doesn't sacrifice Isaac. It works out in the end.
That's right.
God did provide, and there was a ram up there, so we're all right. If we go now to the west,
Yes.
we have the famous Mount Zion and the rest of the old city. Now I want to share with you something personal.
Yes.
I grew up in New Jersey, and I went
Get
to Hebrew school, right?
Wow.
And we would learn the Bible, and it would say Abraham stood on this mountain and looked out to this valley and saw this sea. And in New Jersey, I don't know what they're talking
What does it
about.
mean?
Yes.
What does it mean? When you're standing here, it's different. And I'll
Yes.
give you one example.
Okay.
If you look in Psalm 125, written by King David himself,
That's right.
he's sitting somewhere over here
Yes.
writing this psalm. And it says, Yerushalayim Harim Savivla. Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains.
By
Now,
mountains.
that's beautiful terminology and it's really nice and poetic, but let's go beyond that.
Yes.
If David is here and he looks out his window,
Yeah.
to the north, he sees Mount Moriah.
Right.
He looks to the east, he sees the Mount of
of
Olives.
Yes.
He looks to the south, he sees the ridge of Armon and Netziv. He
Yes.
looks to the west, he sees Mount Zion.
Yes.
Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. The
Yes.
description that we find in Psalms, in the Bible, it's not just figurative, it's literal.
It's literal.
But you
It places
appreciate
it
it,
here.
exactly, you
Right.
appreciate it when you're standing here in the
Right.
ancient city of Jerusalem, the city of
Oh.
David. You say, wow, the reason he said
heartbeat.
Jerusalem is surrounded by
Yes.
mountains
Yeah.
is because it is.
And it says, and that those that trust in him,
Yeah.
they are secure, just like those mountains.
Exactly.
You know, when you look at this today, I mean, we're at a lookout point where we could see history, and this is over 5,000 years of history. You're talking about Abram, who becomes Abraham, and he brings his son. And then he says, God will provide. And it's the same place where we also look at and we see Calvary. God has provided. And for us as Christian, we recognize that this is probably the most fantastic place because,
Yes.
you know, we see
Jesus
this
is here.
as a place of absolute reverence. And I want to ask a question. When we look at all of the different people that are coming around from all over the world, how does that feel as far as a person living in Jerusalem? We've come from Canada,
Yeah.
and I know what it feels like coming from Canada because I'm so excited. I feel like breakdancing. But what does it feel like someone who is actually living here?
And how many are coming now?
Sure. So I think in the Bible, specifically referring to the Temple Mount and the temple, it said it would be a house of prayer for all nations.
Yes.
Jerusalem is meant to be a place that brings people together, a city of unity. When David becomes the king over the United Kingdom, he makes Jerusalem the capital
Yes.
as a place that will unite the tribes of Israel and really unite the world. You know, today, we have over 500,000 people each year coming to visit the city of David. If you go back even 10 years ago, only a few thousand people were coming. More and
It's
more
grown
people.
that much.
It's grown that much that people today want to connect with the history, with the Bible, with the archaeology. It's all coming together here that Jerusalem unites, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whatever your background is, whatever your race is, whether you're Israeli or you're from abroad, Jerusalem brings people together.
You know, one thing that we've all commented on is the peace that we feel here. I mean, this is a land that has some difficulties going on, and yet there is a solemn, beautiful peace.
Shalom,
Do
peace.
you feel that?
Yeah, I think that we're standing here in a moment, you know, it's quiet, it's peaceful. You know, there are lots of people visiting. And I think when you're here, you actually see the fulfillment of a prophecy, the prophecy of Zechariah, that says that he was talking about after the first temple was destroyed and people thought Jerusalem was finished. And he says, no, there's going to come a time where the elderly will be sitting in the streets of Jerusalem and they'll be watching the children playing in those streets and squares. And today when you have in the biblical city of Jerusalem over 500,000 people visiting, we have the literal fulfillment of the
that
prophecy here before our eyes.
Wow.